we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Tuesday the 10th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, live here at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and Bev Turner in London.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to crush Hamas as he compared the terrorist group to the Islamic State. The bombing of Gaza continued overnight, and Hamas warned that if Israel does not end its bombardment, it will execute 1 civilian live on television for every bomb that is dropped without warning.
And pro-Palestinian protesters have gathered in New York, Buenos Aires and London, where 3 people were arrested last night outside Israel's embassy. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, said attempts to stir up community tensions will not be tolerated.
I say, not here. Not in Britain. Not in our country. Not in this century.
Say it as it is. That was a message from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, to the BBC as the channel refuses to call Hamas terrorists. Instead, they are still saying they are fighters, militants, or political resistance.
And in other news here, the Labour leader Keir Starmer will deliver his keynote speech today at the Labour Party conference. He says he'll get Britain building, that's their slogan, if Labour win the next general election. His speech is at 2 p.m. We'll bring you the latest.
So that is a very packed show, lots to get through this morning. What do you want to hear from Keir Starmer in his speech this afternoon? What would persuade you to give him your vote? Email us gbnews@gbnews.com. But first, here is the very latest news with Aaron.
Very good morning to you. It's 9:32. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. More than 187,000 people in Gaza are fleeing their homes this morning after Israel continued its deadly attacks on Hamas terrorists. Israel struck hundreds of targets across Gaza overnight as the conflict enters a fourth day. Supplies of water, food and electricity have been cut off. Palestinian authorities say more than 700 people have been killed there since Saturday, amid reports entire neighbourhoods have been flattened. Hamas has threatened to kill an Israeli hostage for every unannounced airstrike and to publish a recording of each execution. Hours ago, Israel retook control of the Gaza border fence stormed by Hamas gunmen at the weekend that left at least 900 people dead. Well, the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, the United States and the UK have issued a joint statement. This was last night. They offered their united support for Israel and condemned Hamas for what they described as appalling acts of terrorism. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is working closely with Israel.
We are working very closely with them. They know that they have our support. They know that we will continue to work with them to help protect their country and the people of their country, and of course to regain those people who have been kidnapped by the Hamas terrorists.
A Dorset resident is set to challenge the Home Office in court over its use of the Bibby Stockholm barge for asylum seekers. Carolyn Parks, the mayor of the Isle of Portland, believes the government needs permission to use the vessel in Portland Port. Well, the government plans to use barges and military bases to reduce the cost of homing asylum seekers in hotels. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com. Now, back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, will deliver his keynote speech today around 2 o'clock. He's going to promise a decade of national renewal. He's promising a generation of new towns to get Britain building again. Joining me in here at Liverpool is Paul Richards, Labour Party speechwriter, party activist, and like me, veteran of Labour conferences. Paul, this is the most important speech Keir Starmer will make, in my view, in his career to date. He's on the verge of a general election. There will be a general election for sure before the next party conference. The whole thing is going to have to be rewritten from start to finish because of the terrible events unfolding in the Middle East.
I mean, a speech is not a speech until somebody is standing on a stage delivering it. So often there are these very last-minute changes, sometimes even after the speaker has started speaking. But on this occasion, absolutely, the events in the Middle East have to be reflected, and they, I suspect, reflected at the very top of the speech.
And he's going to make the point that Labour is standing foursquare with Israel,
yes,
with the government. There is no political divide here in Britain.
Well, it's very simple, isn't it? There is a democracy that is being attacked by a terrorist organisation. As I say, this is their 9/11, and they're casting Hamas as the Al-Qaeda or the ISIS of the equation, and I think that's absolutely right. So you saw the UK government react strongly in support of our democratic friends in Israel, and you'll see Keir Starmer doing exactly the same thing. That's a no-brainer.
Yeah, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is saying he's not going to give a running commentary on how many British people are caught up in this, and indeed if there are any hostages. Is he right to do that?
I think so, because it would just give succor to the terrorists if they knew that it was coming through. And also, you know, those families in England that know that they have family members who are hostage must be going through hell. I mean, it must be the worst thing. And we know Americans too have been killed and held hostage also, American citizens or dual citizens. So, and the fact that Hamas are threatening to kill their hostages just basically tells you what sort of organisation they are, and they need to be taken out. As the Israeli authorities have said, these people are not the Palestinian people. This is a theocratic, fascistic organisation that is has no place and has to be
engaged in the most horrific medieval scenes of violence that I think we've seen, and I think they're right to be calling it the Islamic State. Paul, how important is it that there is a political consensus in Britain? Because we're a key part of G7, we're a key part of the United Nations, and the leader of the opposition is completely with Keir Starmer. You have to turn the clock back. If we were back in 2018, 2019, if Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, this could be a very difficult moment.
It would have been totally different, wouldn't it? And you may remember a few years ago they had this sort of staged event where the Palestinian flag was given to every delegate on the front row and they all waved their their flags, and it was almost like a sort of a rally. And I think if Corbyn was still leader of the Labour Party, that would be happening again. It would be a sort of Hamas rally instead of a Labour Party conference. And we know where Corbyn's loyalties lie. He doesn't believe Israel should exist, really, and he would be siding with the bad guys. And so it's a sign, Andrew, of how far and fast the Labour Party has changed. Yesterday there was a 1 minute silence for the dead on both sides, because Palestinian civilians are being killed as well, but it was maintained with great dignity, and I don't imagine that could have happened a few years ago.
No, he was outside the conference halls, Corbyn, refusing to condemn Hamas, refusing to condemn them for triggering the violence. He's still a member of the Labour Party, Paul. He's not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
No.
People often confuse the two. He's still a paid-up member of the Labour Party. Are you comfortable with that?
I think that one thing Keir Starmer can do on his journey of proving Labour has changed is to kick him out finally. For years and years and years, Corbyn has always thought, before he became leader, that he was going to be kicked out. He knew he was pushing the envelope and taking the mickey, voting with the Tories night after night, attacking the Labour Party day after day. And I don't think it would come as a surprise to Jeremy if he was kicked out. So I think Starmer can do that as a sort of final nail in the coffin, and just proof that we have changed, which we have. If you look around this conference, it's so different from previous years. I've been to come to 33 of these annually. It's so different from all of those.
Let me ask you about yesterday, for instance. So we saw Peter Mandelson, an architect of New Labour, one of Tony Blair's most important advisors. Not just is he omnipresent around here.
Yes.
There he was. He'd managed to burgle his way into the front row with shadow cabinet ministers during Rachel Reeves' speech. I'm quite confident when Keir Starmer makes his speech this afternoon, Peter Mandelson will be there, invited or otherwise. I've no idea. Peter's always had sharp elbows. But that is a sign that the old, that some of the New Labour people who, let's face it, Labour won 3 general elections. Blair is still your most successful ever leader, are very much back and alive and kicking.
Well, we had a very sombre moment at the start of the conference where we showed a video to commemorate our General Secretary, Margaret Madonna, who very sadly died earlier this year. Very sad. Tony Blair appeared in that video paying his commemoration to Margaret. But the conference was silent. There was no booing or laughter or any kind of reaction. It was just very natural that our greatest leader should be there on the video paying his tribute. And also, the Tony Blair Institute has had a whole series of meetings this week.
Well, they had the biggest party of the night last night.
And people are very happy to be that. There's no, he's not at the parties, obviously. But, his institute lives on. And so there is, I think it's just a recognition that you've got to learn from the people that win, right?
So 2 things here. Is Tony Blair a vote winner for Keir Starmer? Do you expect to see him on the campaign trail?
Tony Blair?
Tony Blair.
Interesting.
Secondly, you were at, is this conference 1996 when Blair led the Labour Party to a historic landslide victory? Or are we in 1991 when Neil Kinnock thought he was going to lead Labour to a comfortable victory and in fact lost unsurprisingly to John Major? Which one are we at?
I think the experience of 91/92, where we thought we were going to win and then it was snatched from us terribly and Neil Kinnock had to concede defeat, is seared on the hearts of those that remember that. So we're trying very hard for this to not be hubristic or triumphalist, or remember the Sheffield rally where it was written up as a sort of Labour's got it.
We're all right.
And so we're not all right. We are carrying a Ming vase very carefully over a polished floor, and so people have a spring in their step, but I don't think it's a swagger. And I think there is a recognition we've got an awfully long way to go. And don't forget, the Conservatives have still got quite a healthy majority in Parliament. A lot of seats that, a lot of switchers could switch from Tory to Labour, and Labour can still lose the election. I asked Neil Kinnock this question the other night, actually, not here, but in London, and I said, are we on the way? And he said, the Tories are probably going to lose, but ... There's not necessarily in the bag, right?
Or it could be a hung parliament.
So the answer to your question is actually probably more 63, which is the before a 64 election where Labour just about squeaked together enough votes to get a very small majority.
With a new Prime Minister, the Tories had, who was unelected,
indeed. And then a vision of technology and change that the Labour Party put forward, and just enough people switched, and so that's probably where we are.
So you're confident when I talk to you on GB News at the Labour conference next year, you'll be talking as part of supporting a Labour government rather than
some kind of Labour government, maybe minority, maybe coalition, maybe who knows what. But I think I think we're in for an interesting and volatile time in politics. We're not in landslide territory.
And just finally, on Keir Starmer's speech, he's not a great speaker. You know that. He's got a peculiar voice, in my view. If you hear it on the radio, it's even more peculiar.
Yeah.
What's he got to do today?
Keep it short.
Oh, well, they never do.
Keep it serious.
No, so no cheap jokes about...
No jokes about tool makers. I just think that's tacky and unpleasant and no need for it. Obviously, it has, as we said at the top of this interview, has to address Israel-Palestine, but then tell the country how Labour would be different and seal that deal. You know, we haven't sealed the deal. I think people have fallen out of love with the current government. People are annoyed, but they haven't fallen in love with Labour just yet. So he needs to just do that. Yeah, so he has to cut through. And Labour's challenge, of course, the geopolitical events going on have really crowded out Labour's very carefully choreographed messaging this week.
How frustrating will that be behind us?
I mean, events did boy events, isn't it? But you can't legislate for it. But it is a shame that I don't imagine we're going to get a big Labour poll bounce off this conference in the same way the Tories didn't either, because the world's attention is elsewhere. But anyway, he's got to cut through with something short, sharp, snappy, and something which speaks to the nation about their concerns. He doesn't want to talk to us in the hall. He should be talking to people out there in the country.
All right, that's Paul Richards. He is a Labour Party speechwriter, Labour Party activist, and like me, he's been coming to these Labour Party conferences since 1988, 1989, when, of course, Neil Kinnock was Prime Minister and Mrs Thatcher was... Sorry, Neil Kinnock was Labour leader and Mrs Thatcher was Prime Minister.
I was going to say that. I don't remember that.
Yeah, Mrs Thatcher, Labour, anything? Not doing so now. Keep letting us know your thoughts on all our talking points. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. Back to you in the studio, Bev. Thank you very much, Paul Richards.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. So, Israel has imposed a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. No power, no food, no gas. Everything is closed. That was a message from the Israeli Defense Minister. In response, Hamas has threatened to start killing civilian hostages if Israel continues to bomb Gaza. The death toll continues to rise on both sides. About 900 people have died in Israel since Saturday's attack. So since Israel began striking Gaza in response, nearly 700 people have now died on the Palestinian side. Let's speak now to an Israeli independent journalist who is over in Tel Aviv, Efrat Fenigson. Good to meet you. Good to see you again, Efrat. Thank you for joining us again on the second consecutive day. So we spoke to you 24 hours ago. What has changed for you there in Tel Aviv?
Well, the picture, Bev, is getting a little bit clearer despite the fog that we have. We hear many unbacked explanations that are surfacing from the institution. It starts with Iranian cyber attack that took down the IDF tech infrastructure. Then we hear a takedown of the observer lookouts of the fence. Now this morning, we see Air Force pilots sharing stories on their Twitter that they were up in the air fighting and protecting already 45 minutes after the breaches, which is very strange because citizens are saying that there was nothing in the air, no helicopter, no Air Force for 5-6 hours and more. In parallel, there's a clear attempt in the mainstream media to silence any voices which are asking how come something like this has happened, calling any question fake news. So this has started. In parallel, there are serious concerns. I'm sure you've heard about Israel having prior intelligence to prepare and may have ignored it or misprioritized it.
So this
the Associated Press has reported.
Yeah. Sorry, Efrat. So this was the Cairo intelligence official. He in Egypt, and they said that Israel ignored repeated warnings of what they're quoting something big and a terrible operation. Netanyahu's office has obviously denied that they knew anything about this. But I guess what you're getting at is the question that everybody was asking over the weekend is how could the breaches of these incredible world-renowned defences have happened in the first place? Do you feel, Efrat, that it's the time to be asking that question now, or should that come later?
Look, we, the citizens, are missing that explanation that would prove that this was a failure and not, God forbid, a planned operation. We need to feel secure and safe at these times that we have a government that is taking care of us if, God forbid, this was a planned operation, then we are on our own. We have to take care of ourselves. And so people are naturally dealing with this question. Is it the time? I know it's harsh. I know people don't want us to ask this question, but we must do it because we need to know who we're facing and what's going on here. It just feels like everything feels very, very weird at the moment.
I asked you yesterday, Efrat, whether Israelis were trying to escape the country, whether people were flooding to the airports. And you said, no, the priorities are to be here. And in fact, afterwards, somebody had said on Twitter that it was a very naive question on my part. And I hold my hands up and say, I probably was a naive question, because I think to live in Israel and to live in your region is only to truly understand the loyalty that you feel to your country and the loyalty that you feel to your people. Just elaborate upon that a bit for us, if you can. To live in a region which is so unstable, when the worst happens like this, your instinct is to remain.
Right. So I don't think it was a naive question. I think it's a fair question. And I will just say, before I will answer it, that a lot of people are looking into going away for a week or so, but the problem is a lot of travel companies have canceled their flights into Israel. So it's harder to go in and out, and prices have gone up as well. So that's just the detail. But the loyalty and the sense of duty and camaraderie that we feel towards each other when emergencies and crises like these happen is something that goes way back in the Israeli or maybe even Jewish culture. And it amazes me every time to see, when something like this happens, how quickly Israelis know to go into survival mode, emergency mode, ask what's needed, how can I help, how can I support. People that have already been dismissed from the army want to go back and help. People are raising money, people are collecting food and passing it to people in need. There are many civilian initiatives taking place right now. So that kind of atmosphere of we are bound to each other, we are one, we need to stand together, this comes up in emergencies like that, and at least I'm happy that we have that. We need some unification. Unfortunately, it happens mostly in hours of trouble like that, but at least it happens.
Yeah. Efrat, good to speak to you. Thank you very much. Stay safe, and maybe return to us later in the week to let us know how the situation is evolving there. Efrat Fenningson there, Israeli independent journalist. Right. Let us know your thoughts at home this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, let's go back to Andrew, who is at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, where Sir Keir Starmer will promise a decade of national renewal with plans to grow the economy and support working people. Hi, Andrew.
Thanks, Bev. Well, I'm joined now by John McTernan, who, of course, worked very closely with Tony Blair. John, it's almost as if Tony Blair's back at this conference. He's not here because there'd be some people who wouldn't want to see him, but the Tony Blair Institute is an important charity worldwide now. Big reception last night, which was standing room only. I was there. I think I saw you there clutching a glass or something. How big an influence is Tony Blair now on Keir Starmer and his direction of travel?
Look, it was clear from Tony Blair's annual conference this year, the Institute's annual conference, there's chemistry between the two of them. They talk in public and they talk in private. And I think it's important. Keir's very clear. Tony Blair won elections, and if Labour wants to win elections, you get nowhere by ignoring the only guy who's still alive who won general elections for the Labour Party. So Tony Blair's important as people who were in the Blair government, whether Peter Kyle's advisor or Pat McFadden's advisor, who are now, and Yvette was a minister, they're there in the shadow cabinet. But the point is, this is the 21st century. These are big challenges, different challenges, and that's why Tony's producing policy about the future rather than, it's not a whole bunch of, this is new Labour policy.
And John, it's a sobering statistic figure for people like you. How many Labour leaders have won a general election since the Second World War? We go through them. Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, Tony Blair.
Yeah, no. And Tony's the only one who was born in the 20th century, I think.
It is. Why so bad?
Because I think Labour is a party that the country reaches to when it needs reconstruction. It needed rebuilding after the Second World War, it needed rebuilding in the 60s and modernising in social terms, it needed rebuilding after Thatcher and Major in the 1990s. And now, after the pandemic and after the austerity and after the cost of living crisis, people once again are going, Labour could rebuild. The trick for Labour is to be so good in what we do that people go, actually, we'll keep you in. We can't always be the kind of the emergency repair guys.
And it is interesting, one of the slogans is building a better Britain.
Yeah. And look, the progressive parties, centre-left parties, only win when they are talking about the future. And so we need rebuilding. And I think some of the ideas and language that Rachel used yesterday, Kiro used today, it's not just about housing, it's not just about planning, it's actually about some kind of shared endeavour.
Right.
We'll only do this if the government can do it with local government, if the government can do it with business, if the government can do it with families. This is not a thing that government can do on its own. It's too big. And it always has been a thing that Britain has to work together. And I think uniting rather than dividing is a big difference between this conference and last week.
Now, you've worked on major speeches in your time for Labour politics, including Tony Blair. This is the biggest speech of any politician's life. This is the biggest ever for Keir Starmer, because it is without doubt the last conference for the general election. This should be the launch pad for the election. They are now, as we speak, still finessing the rewriting. And it reminds me, go back to the TUC conference in 2001, Blair, 9/11 had happened. What happened?
Well, basically, almost on the way to the TUC conference, Tony had to rewrite his speech on the train to Brighton because 9/11 happened. It changed the world, and Tony's a great speechwriter. He actually wrote for himself, wrote the words he was going to say. He tore up what he was going to say to the TUC. And Keir's not going to tear up what he says, but something massive and geopolitical is happening at the moment in Israel with Hamas. Actually, something giant and geopolitical is happening in Ukraine, and something's changing in the world that a Labour leader can't just talk about domestic policy, can't just talk about the NHS or housing. He's got to talk about geopolitics, about defence, about foreign affairs, and that's really hard because government dominate those things. Government goes to summits and things.
It's hard for him to get into the national
Keir's got to find the language. And what I would say is, 3 conferences ago, Labour Party delegates were waving Palestinian flags.
They were.
Yesterday there was a minute's silence for Israel and you couldn't hear a pin drop in the conference chamber. That's the measure of a party that's changed. And Keir today has got to find the words to tell the country, we've changed, we get you, and we've got a vision for your future.
All right, well, we'll find out very soon here on GB News if Keir Starmer has found those words. That's John McTernan, former advisor to Tony Blair and advisor to the Labour Party. Still to come, we're carrying on the build-up to the Labour leader speech. I'm going to be speaking to a member of the Shadow Cabinet who's written a very interesting book on one of Labour's most successful leaders. I'll tell you who that is a little later. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got heavy rain across Scotland through today, bringing some disruption. There'll be some spells of hazy sunshine elsewhere, but it is quite a grey start this morning, some low cloud mist and fog, slowly burning back as we go through the morning, but taking its time. We can see the heavy rain across northwest Scotland, this slowly pushing its way southeastwards. A Met Office rain warning in force here, 20 to 50 millimetres of rain possible, leading to some local flooding in places. Cloudier further southwards across northern parts of England, but the best of the hazy sunshine once again. Central and southern parts of England and Wales, 23, possibly 24 degrees. That heavy rain continues to slowly push its way southeastwards through Tuesday evening. The Met Office warning eases during the evening time as that rain clears, showers following, and then rain turning heavy as it moves into Wales, into the Midlands during the early hours. Southeastern areas staying generally dry. Temperatures turning fresher across the north, single figures here, holding up 14 to 16 Celsius further south. So this cloudy wet zone across central parts of the UK Wednesday morning, this generally slowly moving southeastwards as we head through the day. Quite a muggy feel to things here. Brighter across Northern Ireland, Northern England into Scotland, but quite a cool, blustery northwesterly breeze here with some showers filtering in. Temperatures here lower than recent days, 12 to 15, up to around 21 towards the southeast. See you soon.
Up next, we're going to have the very latest in the Middle East, with Israel pledging to crush Hamas as the fighting continues. And also last night, Robert Kennedy Jr. announced that he will be standing, hopefully, to be President of America as an independent. And that is going to cut the Democratic and the Republican vote right down the middle. Keep your views coming as well this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. Lots to get through. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 10th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, here live at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and Bev Turner in London.
Very good morning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to crush Hamas as he compared the terrorist group to Islamic State. The bombing of Gaza continued overnight, and Hamas warned that if Israel does not end its bombardment, it will execute one civilian on live television for every bomb that is dropped without warning.
And pro-Palestinian protesters have gathered in New York, Buenos Aires and London, where 3 people were arrested last night outside Israel's embassy. Rishi Sunak says attempts to stir up community tensions will not be tolerated.
I say, not here. Not in Britain. Not in our country. Not in this century.
Say it as it is. That was the message from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, to the BBC, as they refuse to call Hamas terrorists. Instead, they are using the phrase fighters, militants, or political resistance.
And in other news, of course, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer today will make his keynote speech to the Labour Party conference. It's that same slogan, Get Britain Building, which he says they will do if the party wins the next general election. The speech kicks off at 2 p.m. We'll have all the latest here on GB News.
I've asked you to get in touch this morning. You have been doing so in your droves. GBviews at gbnews.com. I asked you what you want to hear from Keir Starmer in his speech. What would win your vote? Ronnie has said nothing would persuade me to vote Labour. And Steve says I'd vote for him if he gave a cast-iron promise to keep inward immigration to less than 100,000 people a year. Keep those messages coming to me. But first of all, here's your very latest news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning to you. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. More than 187,000 people are fleeing their homes in Gaza this morning as Israel continues to launch deadly attacks on Hamas terrorists. Israel struck hundreds of targets overnight as the conflict enters a fourth day. Supplies of water, food and electricity to Gaza have been cut off. Palestinian authorities say more than 700 people have been killed there since Saturday. Amid reports, entire neighbourhoods have been flattened. Hamas has threatened to kill an Israeli hostage for every unannounced airstrike and to publish a recording of each execution. Hours ago, Israel retook control of the Gaza border fence, stormed by Hamas gunmen at the weekend, that left at least 900 people dead. And we can take you now live to the Gaza Strip, where you can see the aftermath of last night's airstrikes with plumes of smoke in the air. A mosque, apartment blocks and hospitals among more than 200 sites hit. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described Hamas fighters as savages akin to the ISIS terrorist group. Israel has besieged the enclave and its forces are gathering near the border ahead of an expected major ground offensive into Gaza. The UN is warning that Israel's siege will exponentially deteriorate the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Well, the leaders of France, Germany, Italy and the United States, along with the UK, have issued a joint statement. They offered their united support for Israel and condemned Hamas for what they described as appalling acts of terrorism. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is standing ready to support British-Israeli families.
Completely understand that there'll be many people who are very, very concerned about family, about loved ones who are in Israel. A very large proportion of the British nationals in Israel will be dual nationals who regard Israel as their permanent home, may even be serving with the Israeli Defence Forces. But anyone that is concerned should get in contact with the department. The contact details are available on our website, and we will, of course, provide support to any family who requests that of us.
Meanwhile, in London, 3 people were arrested during protests and vigils over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. One arrest was for assault on an emergency worker, another for racially motivated criminal damage, and the third for possessing an offensive weapon. The Met Police is continuing its inquiries and they are increasing patrols in the capital to reassure the public. The government says it's now safe for asylum seekers to return to the Bibi Stockholm barge, but no date has yet been given. The barge has been vacant since the outbreak of Legionella back in August, but a Dorset resident is set to challenge the Home Office in court over the use of the barge to house asylum seekers. Carolyn Parks, who lives on the Isle of Portland and is also the mayor, believes the government needs planning permission to use the barge in Portland Port. Human rights lawyer David Haig says the case could impact the government's future plans.
This is local residents. This isn't the European Court, this isn't the Supreme Court. This is local residents saying the government has circumvented normal planning rules which protect local areas, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Now, whether or not this will have much impact because the barge isn't currently being used, but it may have impact going forward if the government was looking at putting other barges in other areas.
The UK might have the slowest economic growth among a group of G7 countries next year. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF downgraded its prediction for the UK's economic growth for next year from 1 to 0.6%. This would make the UK's growth rate the weakest among a group of advanced economies. The IMF also predicts the UK prices could still go up by 7.7% this year. And the government will spend nearly £200 million to attract more teachers into the profession. The money will be used to fund scholarships, bursaries and salary grants. Scholarships for those training to teach maths, physics, chemistry and computing will be brought up to £30,000 tax-free. It's after teaching unions warned of a deepening recruitment and retention crisis. And the UK and Ireland's bid to host Euro 2028 is expected to be officially approved later today. It follows Turkey's withdrawal to focus on a joint bid alongside Italy for Euro 2032. 10 stadiums, including Wembley and Dublin's Aviva Stadium, are part of the bid. UEFA has reserved 2 host berths for non-qualifiers, but England will prefer to qualify outright. The bid, expected to generate up to £2.6 billion, is seen as vital for UEFA's financial recovery post-COVID. This is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, I'm here with you at the Labour Party conference, and some breaking news. The UK is on forecast to be the slowest growing economy amongst advanced economies in the G7 next year. Guess who says that? That's the International Monetary Fund, who've slashed Britain's growth outlook ahead of the general election year. Well, with me here in Liverpool is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, I'm tempted to say, here we go again. Don't they always make these doom and gloom predictions and then have to revise them upwards?
I'm afraid they do. This is a story, I wouldn't say close to my heart, but with which I have some familiarity. I used to work at the IMF in Washington, D.C. as an economist. And it seems in recent years they've had a real downer on the UK. I did a calculation 6 months ago that 27 of the IMF's last 30 forecasts on the UK economy have been too pessimistic. Particularly since 2016. The US doesn't like the fact that we left the European Union. And now the IMF has forecast that this year we're going to grow by 0.4%, which keeps us ahead of Germany, because Germany are in recession, their economy is contracting. But next year we're going to grow by 0.6%, by which time the other G7 advanced industrial economies will have caught up and overtaken us, leaving us last at the bottom of the league table of growth, economic expansion among advanced industrialised societies. I don't think that's true.
And why? On what basis have they revised us backwards?
Well, they're saying that the UK is particularly prone to inflation. They're also saying that UK interest rates are going to go up a lot further than they already are.
Really?
The Bank of England's increased interest rates to 5.25%. The IMF is saying that interest rates in this country will peak at 6%, which is, if that's true, that's terrible news for lots of mortgage holders, people with personal loans, businesses who are indebted. It's also worth saying, Andrew, do you remember over the summer, the Office for National Statistics announced it had miscalculated growth over recent years.
I do.
And far from the UK having the slowest recovery from recession after the global pandemic, actually we had one of the fastest. So now our recovery since the pandemic is again in the middle of the pack of the G7 advanced industrialised countries. Guess what? That was months ago. The IMF have not included those revisions in their current estimate.
Why?
It strikes me as remiss at best.
Or deliberate?
Well, a bad judgment, let's say, because they would have had time to include them if they wanted to. Look, for many, many years now, the IMF has got forecasts about the UK economy wrong. If the IMF were correct, Andrew, this country would currently be in recession. The economy would currently be contracting. But it isn't contracting. It grew by about 0.3% over the last quarter, which, given that interest rates have been going up around the world, wasn't bad. So I do think this is over gloomy. Objectively, I think any economist who looks back over recent IMF forecasts would agree there seems to be a systemic gloominess towards the UK. But that doesn't matter, because this will be reported across mainstream broadcast outlets, in many of the newspapers, that yet again the UK is at the bottom of the growth league within the G7. Labour will make hay with that. I tell you what, the IMF didn't include recent revisions in its estimate of British growth, as I just said. But I bet Keir Starmer's revising his speech now to include a paragraph which says, yet again, we're at the bottom of the UK growth, of the worldwide growth league among advanced industrialised countries, according to the International Monetary Fund.
And it's interesting because Pat McFadden, who's Labour's campaign director, was on GB News Breakfast this morning with Eamon and Isabel, and he was talking about the impact on the economy of COVID and of the Ukraine war. But when it suits them, they completely exclude that from when they want to criticise the British government's economic record.
I think
they want it both ways.
The whole global economy is down in the doldrums to some extent.
Sure.
We've had, a once-in-a-century pandemic, which led to the biggest economic contraction in recorded history. Then we had the war in Ukraine, which has hit Western Europe particularly hard, unlike the States, because the States has got much cheaper energy, because it fracks, it produces a lot of its own oil and gas. Europe, the UK, we've suffered because our energy prices have been particularly high, and the UK does have the highest electricity prices in Europe now for various reasons, and that is slowing growth. But we also, Andrew, have a really good track record on inward business investment. We have a good track record of business creation. We have a good track record of entrepreneurialism, and our exports to not only to the EU but to the rest of the world have never been higher. So the UK economy has shown a lot of resilience, as the ONS, our own statistical service, had to acknowledge over the summer when it upgraded not just future growth forecasts for the UK, but our track record on past growth. The IMF has completely ignored what the ONS, which is one of the most respected statistical bodies in the world, it's completely ignored what the ONS has said over the summer. And that strikes me, at the very best, as a lack of judgment.
Let's talk as well what's happening now, Liam, in the Middle East. The impact on oil prices. If you go back to the 50th anniversary of the war in 1973, it led to a huge hike in oil prices. Britain ended up with a 3-day week. The lights went out. There was a change of government the following year. How much of an impact potentially does what's happening in the Middle East, and there seems to be no quick solution, what impact is that going to have on oil prices and the international economy and on Britain?
Well, this is my worst case scenario, and I've written about it. I wrote about it on the GB News website yesterday. I've written about it in Telegraph columns over very recent weeks. There is a concern, and under these circumstances, the IMF's forecast may be more credible, that oil prices are rising, not just because the OPEC exporters cartel, led by the Saudis, are deliberately pumping less oil onto global markets to keep prices higher, artificially high. We have seen oil prices go up, Andrew, from around $70 a barrel in June to $90, even $95 a barrel this month. Ask any van driver, the price of filling up the van with diesel, the family saloon with petrol, has rocketed, particularly in August, but also in September as well. And now you have these awful events in Israel, this escalation of violence which could spread across the Middle East. Fingers and toes crossed it doesn't, but that's the danger. And global oil markets once again are bidding up the price of oil, and OPEC again is restricting prices to push up that price of oil. It's not only so the OPEC members make more money, we're talking Iran, Iraq, Saudi, Venezuela, Nigeria. It's not only so they make more money, some of the OPEC members actually want to put ideological pressure on the West, partly linked to the war in Ukraine and perhaps now linked to open conflict between Israel and Hamas. That's geopolitics. That's, I'm afraid, how it works.
All right, that's Liam Halligan, who's our business and economics editor, who's rather sceptical about that projection from the IMF, who don't like, because we shouldn't forget, of course, Tom Scholar, who was sacked as Chief Treasury Mandarin by Liz Truss. Is he not doing work for the IMF?
I think you'll find he's very much on their payroll.
Thought he might be, yeah. Now, still to come, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to run for the White House as an independent candidate. Will Joe Biden and Donald Trump be shaking in their boots? We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Very good morning, it's 10:19. Thank you for joining Britain's Newsroom on GB News this morning. Andrew Pearce is at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool and I'm here in London. Right, I've been asking you to get in touch this morning. And this is what you've been saying. We've got Keir Starmer's speech this afternoon. We will be bringing it to you here on GB News. But I asked you, what would you expect to hear in order to get your vote? And Mel in Sunderland has said, where will Starmer build these new towns? This is the idea that they're going to build back better here in the UK. Where will he find new doctors, nurses, schools and services to support these new towns? If these houses are to be built to modern eco standards with heat pumps, which they should be in my opinion, how will these new houses be built cheaply so they can be affordable? And Paul in Northwich has said, is it just me, but whenever I hear or see Starmer talk, I find him extremely dull and boring. Some would say, Paul, that actually that is what some voters want. He's just a very steady, safe pair of hands. I don't know whether you saw Rachel Reeves, who would be, she's currently Shadow Chancellor, who would be the first female Chancellor in history, were they to be elected, talking about securonomics. That's her plan. The idea is they're going to offer security, stability. But you lot at home don't seem to disagree particularly. Sarah has said the Labour Party announced a frenzy of house building. Unfortunately, it won't happen. Over the last 13 years, the developers have held back on house building to effectively artificially regulate and inflate house prices by controlling supply and demand. And Chris says, nothing would make me vote for Starmer or indeed the Labour Party ever. And Colin has said, does it really matter what Keir Starmer says today? Next week, he'll say something different. There are a lot of you agreeing with the idea that Keir Starmer is the stereotype of a flip-flopper. Keep your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. But now back to Andrew in Liverpool.
Buttons.
Thank you, Bev. Well, we're here at the Labour conference. We're just hours away and the excitement is mounting in the conference hall. So Keir Starmer's going to make his keynote speech. With me to talk about that is, of course, our very own political editor, Chris Hope, and Kevin Craig, who is a political strategist and former Labour councillor. Gentlemen, I'll let you discuss the speech.
Kevin Craig, you were there yesterday at the business day, part of the business day. This time last week, or last Monday, Rishi Sunak told business people that Labour will tolerate you, but we love you. Do you feel tolerated by Labour or loved?
That was an outright lie, actually, by our Prime Minister.
Well, it's his opinion.
Well, it's a lie, because I'm telling you, the Labour Party is not tolerating business. It sees business as an absolute essential partner to get this country back on its feet again. And I've been a businessman for 25 years. I work with over 100 people in the company I founded. The Labour Party now is as pro-business and understands the value of it in our country as it did in '97.
So where's the offer? Where's the promise of cutting corporation tax? Where's the offer of maybe cutting income tax for workers?
Well, the party's been really clear that it's in no position to start making predictions on tax before it's got the books and it's seen what state the country's finances in. What I did like yesterday, of course, was the pledge by our Shadow Chancellor to get back our money, 7 billion quid, which was basically fluffed up the wall during COVID by this government and their pals. Homes bought off it by guys who started a company out 4 days ago, and we want our money back, Chris.
Can I just interrupt there? How are they going to get it back when the current government hasn't? Do you not think they've tried to get it back?
Andrew.
It's a stunt. It's a gimmick.
Andrew,
we're going to have an anti-corruption czar to get the COVID money.
Andrew, I know you're a bit twitchy at the thought of the prospect of the Labour government, okay? But listen.
Looking forward to getting stuck into it.
This government we currently have cannot administrate. They're not interested in the details.
I've got to say, to be fair to Kevin, to intervene there in that little dispute, 100 people watched that speech on the Rachel Reeves on the stand. That was the biggest cheer was for that. So for me, that was an example of politics, away from the boring, snoring Rachel Reeves.
Oh, yeah.
To actual politics.
People feel, excuse my cockneyism, right? People feel done over by what happened in COVID and the waste of our money. And if you're struggling to make ends meet with food prices going up, utility bills going through the roof, these numbers matter, and that's what Rachel's tapped into, and I think it is important, and I do have faith in her.
Even if they claw back a fraction, let's say 10 billion or whatever has gone missing, then that's going to be a departmental budget, a Home Office
want the money back.
We do want the money
budget. So I mean, and it is what the Tories have got now is they've got the huge cost of the COVID pandemic, 400 billion, 100 billion a war in Europe. No one's questioning that, but that's 500 billion they haven't had. They thought they weren't going to be losing in 2019.
Yeah, and my point is because you can't make pledges on tax before you've even been given the responsibility by the British people. One thing, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and those around him do not think this election is won, okay? No. To serve this country is a huge deal, and there is trust to be won back by GB News listeners and viewers. The job's not done.
We're very keen to
and he gets it. Well, the problem we have, let's be honest about this, is when you've got Priti Patel going rah, 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 thanks GB News, you're our pals, that doesn't go down well in the Labour Party and is unhelpful for, I might say, credible journalists like your good selves.
If more Labour MPs or leaders came on this show, or these shows, Andrew's show, Bev's show, whatever, that would be watered down.
Well, chicken in the egg.
Let's move away from GB News, Kevin. Have you met Keir Starmer while you've been here?
Not yet. I'm hoping to see him later today after the speech.
You met the team around him. I mean, they do feel as though they're the coming government, don't they?
They feel like serious people to me. They feel like people who don't think this is in the bag. That's the thing I can't say enough, okay? He knows that there is a need now for more detail about what does life look like under the Labour Party if it's given the privilege to serve.
What's missing for me is the retail offer. You and I around it, and Andrew was too in 1996 when we had that big conference before looking into the Labour landslide in May '97. Even now I can remember the pledge cards, education, 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 tough on crime, tough on the
5 pledges, crime,
really accessible. People here don't know what his pledges are really, and there's no actual slogan that people understand. And to me, they've been given this opportunity to do it without earning it.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with that. I think that Keir Starmer has shown trust, responsibility, love of country, a desire to serve. The areas have been, there's broad detail, prioritising us as the biggest economy in the G7, the NHS, safe streets, clean energy and opportunity. Now, Andrew, hang on, before you get stuck in, right, there's potentially a year to go of this election. Every time Labour's come out with a good policy, in my opinion, the Tories nick it because they are bereft and tired. So you will see more detail coming. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor kicked that off, and there'll be more from Keir today. But every time Labour opens their mouth, the Tories nick it.
Right. What are Keir Starmer's 5 mission pledges?
The mission pledges are to create the fastest growing economy in the G7, okay, to create an NHS.
Oh,
listen, I can't remember. Listen, I'm a busy man. Listen, I can't. Listen, Andrew. Hang on, Andrew. No. Listen, it's all around us, Andrew. Take a look. My point is, I can't remember my kids' birthdays. So listen, I want to finish. Crime, okay, the NHS, opportunity linked back to the schools policies. There are 5 broad areas where this country will be different under a Labour government, with more detail to come.
Anyway,
Andrew, there's a man behind you who should come on the show, Peter Mandelson.
Look at this. Look at this here, Andrew.
Hello, my Lord. How are you?
Notes.
Going to come on?
Look at this, Peter.
He won't come on.
We're talking about you.
The future Labour government.
New Labour's 5
a
pledges.
wonderful Labour government and what it's going to offer the country.
Peter and I go back many, many years. How are you, my Lord?
5 pledges or 5 missions?
5 missions.
You didn't know the 5 missions. You had to write them down.
Restart the economy.
There you are.
Unlock cheap green energy. Get the NHS back on its
safer streets.
Reform. Unlock educational opportunities.
Yeah.
Safer streets.
You're on 6
He knows them.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Why were you on the front row of a speech yesterday with the shadow cabinet? You're not in politics anymore.
Well,
Andrew.
Put there.
Andrew, there's a microphone.
I was put there in order to show my support for Johnny Reynolds and Rachel Reeves' speeches, which I did with great enthusiasm because they were great speeches. And I was put there in Sadiq Khan. We were like 2 bookends. I've never really previously seen myself as a bookend to Sadiq Khan, but you know. How the mighty have fallen. I mean, we've been reduced to being a stage prop.
When we last interviewed you my podcast, you said you miss government every single day.
I do.
Do you think this party misses it every single day?
I think the bulk of it miss government every single day. There's still that sort of small minority who prefer to be protesting in the streets. But my word, are they a very small minority now.
Peter, you and I have been going to Labour conferences for more years than we care to remember. Does this feel to you more like a 91 conference when Kinnock didn't make it? Or does it feel like 96 when Blair went on to that big trial?
Certainly not 91, 92. Nothing like it. 2 reasons. In 92, Labour wasn't ready. We hadn't changed enough. We hadn't won back people's confidence. Also in 92, the Conservatives were still a fairly united fighting force under John Major. Chris Patten was the party chair who was running a pretty good machine. He had a cabinet who was still hungry for power.
No.
Not now. Not with these people, with Rishi Sunak. So they're all like 3 different parties fighting each other as if they're already in opposition. I mean, you've got the centre-right Conservative Party, which you associate with David Cameron. You've got the right wing, which is headed up by Rishi Sunak. And then you've got the further right Conservative Party, sort of, you know, trumpeted and supported by GBNews.
It doesn't help, does it, if Priti Patel's banging on about...
Oh, I want GBNews to keep going. They're stirring the pot. They're creating divisions in the Conservative Party.
We're doing a much better job than that.
They're undoing the Conservative Party, and very, very timely it is too.
You knew, so mischievous. You knew Tony Blair. He's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
People tell
I
us,
still do, actually.
Of course, he isn't here. You're here. People say to us that Keir Starmer is not Tony Blair. Now, is that your worry about it?
No, I said that. I said...
Is that a bad thing?
No, I said Keir Starmer is not Tony Blair. But I said something else. He's the nearest thing to Tony Blair of any leader of the Labour Party since Blair.
Right.
He's a mainstream politician, you know. He's completely in touch with and connected with what people are thinking in the country. He's totally committed to restarting the economy, and he's not wobbly on defence and national security. Now that's what people want to see from a Prime Minister. They saw it in Blair, big celebrity, big box office. Keir Starmer is not the same as Blair, but as I've said, he's the nearest thing to Blair of any leader since Blair. That's my view.
And have you helped with his speech?
No, I'm
just shy and retiring.
I'm just going to sit there in the hall waiting with bated breath.
Will you be sat in the front row again? Will you be in the front row again?
Honestly, I will go where I'm put.
I'll say one final thing. Are you the secret power behind the throne, you and Tony Blair? Everyone tells us you're in daily contact with the team, you're behind the scenes.
I love the Starmer team. They remind me of the 1997 team. Absolutely focused, driven, 24/7. I love the Starmer team. They are so good and they're so professional. They care about the country. They know who they're talking to, which is the public in this country, not their own party activists. So
which one
I'm
of them
very
is Peter
keen on...
Mandelson in the 1917? Which one in this team is the Peter Mandelson figure?
You know who it is.
Come on.
You know who it is.
Who?
He's great.
Tell us who.
He's great.
See you later.
Peter Mandelson, always a joy to talk to you.
Just like that.
There we are. You see, we get Labour peers on the show as well.
I've got my microphone. Lord Mandelson. Sorry, Kevin was completely overshadowed.
Oh, no, it's great.
And he
rightly so.
And he knew the 5 mission statements, unlike you.
Well, I'm running a business over 100
Peter
people.
Mandelson probably wrote them.
Yeah, we're married on. He knew him quite well, didn't he?
Yeah. Thank you very much. We're going to have to let Kevin go. We did let him speak a little bit, but we wanted to hear from Peter Mandelson as well. Keep ready to know all your thoughts and talking points. gbviews@gbnews.com. Back to you in the studio, Bev.
Thank you, guys. OK, still to come this hour, the Immigration Minister has blasted the BBC for not calling Hamas terrorists. Instead, they're using the words freedom favour fighters, militants or political resistance. We're going to debate if the BBC is right to do so. And carbon rating for food. That's right. Hilton Hotels are adding carbon ratings to its menus to encourage customers to choose more environmentally friendly meals. I think they're doing you a favour, and I'll tell you why after this morning's news with Aaron.
It's 10:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. More than 187,000 people in Gaza have been internally displaced as Israeli airstrikes against Hamas terrorist targets continued overnight. Supplies of water, food and electricity to Gaza have been cut off as the conflict enters a 4th day. Palestinian authorities say more than 700 people have been killed there since Saturday, amid reports entire neighbourhoods have been flattened. And these are the scenes live now over the Gaza Strip. You can see the smoke filling the sky following fresh strikes that are happening with regularity. Hamas has threatened to kill an Israeli hostage for every unannounced airstrike and to publish a recording of each execution. Israel says it has now secured the Gaza border fence breached by Hamas gunmen at the weekend that left at least 900 people dead. The leaders of France, Germany, Italy, the US and the UK issued a joint statement last night offering united support for Israel and condemning Hamas for what they described as appalling acts of terrorism. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is standing ready to support British-Israeli families.
Completely understand that there'll be many people who are very, very concerned about family, about loved ones who are in Israel. A very large proportion of the British nationals in Israel will be dual nationals who regard Israel as their permanent home, may even be serving with the Israeli Defense Forces. But anyone that is concerned should get in contact with the department. The contact details are available on our website, and we will, of course, provide support to any family who requests that of us.
The government says it's now safe for asylum seekers to return to the Bibi Stockholm barge, but they haven't given a date yet. It has been vacant since an outbreak of Legionella in August. But local Mayor Carolyn Parks is set to challenge the Home Office in court. She believes the government needs planning permission to use the barge in Portland Port. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick snapshot of the financial markets. The pound buys you $1.2262, €1.1567. The price of gold, £1,515.88 per ounce. The FTSE 100 is at 7,601 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Up next, the Hilton Hotel is introducing carbon ratings to its menus to encourage customers to choose more environmentally friendly meals. Oh dear, give me strength. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, it's 10:39. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce in Liverpool. So Sir Keir Starmer has vowed to make the streets safer and our future brighter. But is he the man to do it? I am delighted to be joined now by our senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and political commentator, Tonya Buxton, to discuss this. I have to ask you first, Nigel, is this the first Labour Party conference you haven't been at in decades?
Yes.
And is that because you now work for GB News? Were you frightened to go?
No, this is an Andrew Pearce...
They would welcome you.
They would welcome... They do welcome GB News. This is an Andrew Pearce conspiracy theory that I wouldn't show my face there amongst my Labour mates because I work here. In fact, the reason is that, unlike the Tories, you don't need a lefty commentator up in Liverpool because there's loads of lefties there.
Well, this is true.
So I'm doing the shows in London.
Excellent. And have you ever been to a political conference, Tonya? I had my first one in Manchester last
No, I've
week.
never been, but I gather that it's just all
drunken debauchery, is that right?
There's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of partying, there's a lot of people who say that they're having conversations which are going to change the nation, Nigel.
Which they're not.
Which is sort of, there isn't really, is there? It's quite a depressing situation.
I do think they're actually fairly pointless because the only advantage of it is, A, the money they get out of it. There's a huge amount of money that they earn.
This is the thing. So I learned that the Toy Party Conference, they make about £2 million from that event.
And the rest, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so every drink that you have in a hotel, they take a rake off from that. They take a rake off from the rooms, so it's a big money raiser. The other, I mean, the politicians dread them. They actually hate these things.
Right.
But the activists who actually do all the work, who go out on a cold and windy night, who leaflet, they like to rub shoulders with the people they campaign for.
Yeah.
So from their point of view, it's a morale booster.
Yeah.
That's really why they happen. The rest of it is just
It's very true, that, isn't it? Because those are the grassroots political activists on which all of these parties rely.
Yes.
And it's like being in an orchestra, and this is band camp for them, isn't it? That's what.
Yes, that's absolutely it.
That's what I felt. This is their fun bit.
But you do want, you know, the people that are working hard do want to rub shoulders with you. They want to know that they're acknowledged, and that's the biggest thing there. So if it does just that, I didn't realise it raised quite so much money.
Neither did I. Well, this is the thing. There are loads of corporate stands there, and apparently, and I must ask Andrew about this when we go back to him a little later, the Labour conference has got many more well-known brands who've got big supermarkets, you know, the brands and stuff that we buy in shops, there than we're at the Toy Party conference.
That's right.
Why is that?
Because this is 1996 all over again, that normally business sort of gravitates to the Tories.
Yeah.
This year, business knows that Labour will probably be the next government. They want to suck up to the Labour Party. The same thing happened in 96 when Tony Blair was on the verge of his landslide.
So they're reading the political winds, basically, and they're deciding to cosy up to Labour. I wonder if that's a little premature, Tonya, from the brands.
Well, you know, I think I'd like to say it is, but the reality is that Labour are going to win because people don't want to vote Tory. You know, Labour are going to win not because anybody wants Labour, because nobody does, but there is nothing else. And the way our political system works, it doesn't allow for any of the independence which people do want in to make it.
Yeah.
So they're winning by default, not because they've got anything to say.
Well, there was a fascinating survey out yesterday which showed that people that considered themselves to be working class, who voted for Boris Johnson in the 2019 election, are now not going to vote for Labour, and they're not going to vote for Conservative, but they're going for the more independent parties, the reforms, the reclaims, or the smaller ones.
Well, I mean, with these slogans, I mean, just, do you know what drives me nuts? Firstly, OK, I'm biased, but I cannot stand Keir Starmer's voice. So,
it's a very good impression.
Labour is the change this country needs. Blah, 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 blah. That's all I hear when he speaks. There's no manlyship about him. And all these slogans, you know, a decade of renewal, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to, you know, 13,000 more neighbourhood police, PCSOs, we're going to change the NHS. It's just all big blah and no actually kind of content behind how he's going to do any of it.
It's a lot of sloganeering, isn't there? I think that's what we're going to see.
Yeah.
And
bring it on.
And Rachel, it's all, but it's tub thumping. But maybe Nigel, that's all he can do at the moment, because the risk is, as Tonya says, the risk is that he says too much, and people go, actually, every time he's given any detail, for instance, sharing an immigration capacity with Europe, he seems to alienate people who are moving towards him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got to remember that election is due. They're all working on their manifestos for the election. They're not going to give too much policy away now while they're doing that. And yes, you're right. He got it in the neck over Europe and migration. He was totally misrepresented by the Tories, but that's the danger. So every time he's come up with new things, either the Tories have nicked it or misrepresented it. So on this one, I think that he's a naturally cautious man. It'll be a pretty cautious speech with a few policy announcements in there that we know about. The new towns, for instance, he's talking about building, but nothing gigantic.
There's no confidence in him as a leader, and that's the reality. I mean, Labour might be doing better in the polls, better than the Conservatives, but it's unusual that the leader hasn't got confidence. So it shows you that it's got nothing to do with the party, nothing to do with him. It's just that people are so fed up with Conservative rule.
Well, we saw Rishi Sunak obviously
taking
to the stage in Manchester last week, introducing introduced by his wife. Did you see any of that? Were you familiar? Or did you like the approach of having her introduce someone? No, I don't think a lot of people did.
I didn't like it at all.
No.
And also they're
very
just,
American.
It's
very American, very presidential. But of course, he didn't get the bounce in the polls that you would expect after the conference. Why, Tonya?
Because nobody likes him, and because also we just don't believe in him. He doesn't understand what we are going through. He is a billionaire's husband, isn't he? That's what he is. He's super wealthy. I don't believe what comes out of his mouth. I don't think he's sincere. I think he has absolutely no idea what we, the British people, have been going through. The suffering that the common man, working man, you know, you've got two, even professional people cannot make ends meet, never mind about anything else. He has no idea about it. So that's why.
So it's not, when you say he's not sincere, it's not that you think he's lying to the country. You just think he just can't relate.
At all, not at all.
Bear in mind, it's 13 years of Tory rule. They're tired. I mean, governments do get tired. There's a kind of 13-year cycle which seems to come round. So Margaret Thatcher lasted 13 years. New Labour lasted 13 years.
Unlucky for some.
But
and we've come to the end of this one.
I do think the reason that I don't think it's a numbers thing. I think it's the fact that Conservatives did not have Conservative rule. They did not rule like Conservatives. They're the most unconservative government. They've raised taxes. They've made it really hard for small businesses. What they did during lockdown was obscene. You know, it was draconian. It was Stasi. It was communist even.
I think,
So how can that be Conservative rule?
It's very difficult for them now, isn't it? Because they were at the helm during such a tumultuous period in time. They're now sort of talking as though they were passengers at that period of time. And you think, you know, you were in the driving seat, and that's a very difficult prospect to sell to people.
And obviously, and they have had sort of things that came out of the blue that they weren't expecting. The Ukraine war, certainly COVID, and I think that, I mean, Rishi Sunak, I think, distinguished himself during COVID with the furlough scheme. That was a great one to stop people losing their jobs.
No, but the thing is, all he did is make people not go back to work now. He's caused this mess.
It's and also, I mean, in terms of the finances, Rachel Reeves obviously talking yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor, and saying that she's going to introduce a COVID, was it a COVID corruption commissioner, Tonya, to rake back some of the money that was taken during that time. COVID fraud, £7.2 billion, and only 2% of those grants has ever been recovered.
It's never going to happen.
Do you like the idea that she's looking to?
I like the idea she's looking to it, but again, it sounds like just a speech bubble coming out of somebody who wants to gain something. It's never going to happen. That money is gone. They didn't keep tabs on it then. They're not going to be able to get it back now.
Right, let's talk about the Hilton Hotel adding carbon ratings to the menu. So, as you might have noticed now, when we go out to eat, it has the calories on the menu. I'm not a big fan of that, I can't lie. If I'm going out to eat, I want to treat myself. I don't want the guilt. And now the Hilton Hotel are putting carbon ratings on the food. I think they've done us a favour, Nigel. Do you know why? Because if you're sat at dinner with someone who decides not to order something because the carbon, you know they're not going to be your friend. You might be on a first date.
That's it.
You're on a first date.
That's it.
A first date and only date on that
basis. If you're on a first date with a man who says, oh, I really fancy the steak, but actually I'm going to go for the fish finger because it's got a little bit less carbon.
Oh, my gosh.
Dumped.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like someone walks in with a mask, you know. I don't know why I'm here. I would just walk straight out if that was the first date. But anyway, but the thing about it is this whole carbon thing is, especially the fake burgers, you know, the fake meat. You know, so they want you to have a less carbon footprint, but they want you to eat something more processed. And we know how bad processed foods are. Fake meats are processed. So, you know, which are you going to go for, the planet or your own health? I mean, it's ridiculous.
You can ignore these things.
And it doesn't work.
If the calorie count is on there and you don't want to know what it is, then you can ignore it. If you do want to know what it is, look at it. The same thing, if you're environmentally conscious and you really do want to know what the carbon footprint...
Then you're really dull.
I think I probably still will have the ribeye steak, which has the highest level.
Can I also add that it's got something like avocado, you know, it has a much less carbon footprint, but at what cost? So we're now in these mono fields of avocados that you're getting now. At what cost to the world, to the bees, to nature? So, you know, these carbon footprints, they're not true examples. They're fake and they're wokery, they're virtue signalling, and I hate it.
So what, but also I think what worries me, Nigel, you say, you know, you can ignore it, but the psychological damage we're doing to people with all this, like, metastasizing of guilt all the time. You've got to feel bad, you've got to feel bad. We all want clean oceans, clean rivers, clean air. I want to live in a clean country where most of our homes generate our own energy.
Well,
so we're not reliant on big companies.
Or you could say that people want to be informed, and it's then up to them what choice they make, but this time it's an informed choice. So if you want to have a low-calorie meal, it seems to be reasonable to see how many calories that meal is going to give you.
But isn't it funny how it happens? Because when the calories was first announced as being a project, a policy that we were going to see this on restaurants, at first I was quite happy about it for that very reason. And now I'm realising psychologically what it's doing to the nation. And it's now drip, drip. And of course, it's now become this, that every choice we make seems to be about some sort of moral, has to have a moral dimension.
It's loaded with guilt and it's loaded with fear. And as adults, we can maybe deal with it. But for children, for kids, this carbon footprint thing really, really upsets me.
And isn't it about the idea that it's not going to make any genuine difference?
None at all.
If you have a fish finger butty, Nigel Nelson, instead of your ribeye steak...
Which I probably won't.
Well, that would help save the planet.
OK.
But if you do that, we're living a joyless existence.
It depends on how much you care about that particular thing. So if you are somebody who's really determined to get to net zero, you might have your fish finger. All you're doing is you're giving people the information they need to make a choice. And the more choice you get, it seems to me that is a good thing.
If Hilton really wanted to save the planet, if the Hilton Group wanted to do that, they would ban plastics throughout their whole
100%.
empire. That would save the seas, that would save so much more than this virtue signaling.
I agree with that.
That's my point, is that they're doing these type of things to virtue
and supermarkets too should be banning plastic.
If Keir Starmer came in and said, I'm going to ban plastics, then I would maybe vote for him.
Yeah. There are some things which cut through with the public, but I think it's the futility of this. If you're compromising your burger for a vegetarian pasta whilst China's building a coal-fired power station every week, you're an idiot.
Yeah, but that's all... that is the argument for not doing anything.
No, it's not.
The whole point is that climate change is a world problem and the world has to pull together to do it, which means we do our bit. If China makes a small change, it'll be more important for the climate than a big change in a place like Britain.
It's just like the insanity of me not having a burger. In order to do what? It will be. It's about virtue signaling. I don't like the phrase virtue signaling. Virtue is generally good. Being a good person is a good thing.
But signalling it is not.
But the idea of sitting across the table from someone who goes, oh, you're having the steak, are you? Oh, well, I'm only going to have the vegetarian pasta.
Well, I mean...
that would make me order two.
It's the world I don't want to live in, Nigel Nelson.
If it becomes a game of one-upmanship... No,
it's going to be.
Yeah. Why should it be? I would actually look at this thing. I would certainly take note of it, but then I decide to eat what I want to eat. And if somebody felt differently because they really believe that they can actually help with the climate, they go for the fish.
Do you know what it's going to cause? Division. No, like everything else which comes into this sphere of environmental and social governance, there's going to be arguments around the table, there's going to be arguments amongst families. Sorry, go on, Tanya.
Absolutely, but my main thing is I don't like what it does to kids.
Yes, exactly.
That's the main thing to me. As adults, like you said, you're going to decide to have whatever you like, Nigel. You know, you really will, and as would you and as would I. But what it does to kids, it makes them feel guilty all the time. They've had enough fear and enough guilt labelled upon them.
We've got 2.6 million people in this country off sick, with long-term sick. A lot of that is mental health conditions. This is not a coincidence. This mindset we're being moved into. Can you imagine sitting at the table with a really virtuous teenager who's had all week at school being told it's their responsibility to save the planet, and you try and order a T-bone steak?
Then I really enjoy having that conversation with them, because
whilst you
I sit through my rare steak.
Mouthful of your steak.
Yeah, but the whole thing is that would actually spark off a conversation with that teenager. We could talk about climate change, talk about his or her attitudes to it.
And manipulation. Right, Tanya, Nigel, thank you so much. We're going to be crossing back over to the Labour Party conference in Liverpool soon, where Sir Keir Starmer will pledge to fix broken Britain. One vegetarian pasta at a time, presumably. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got heavy rain across Scotland through today, bringing some disruption. There'll be some spells of hazy sunshine elsewhere, but it is quite a grey start this morning, some low cloud mist and fog, slowly burning back as we go through the morning, but taking its time. We can see the heavy rain across northwest Scotland, this slowly pushing its way southeastwards. A Met Office rain warning in force here, 20 to 50 millimetres of rain possible, leading to some local flooding in places. Cloudier further southwards across northern parts of England, but the best of the hazy sunshine once again Central and southern parts of England and Wales, 23, possibly 24 degrees. That heavy rain continues to slowly push its way southeastwards through Tuesday evening. The Met Office warning eases during the evening time as that rain clears, showers following, and then rain turning heavy as it moves into Wales, into the Midlands during the early hours. Southeastern areas staying generally dry. Temperatures turning fresher across the north, single figures here, holding up 14 to 16 Celsius further south. So this cloudy wet zone across central parts of the UK Wednesday morning, this generally slowly moving southeastwards as we head through the day. Quite a muggy feel to things here. Brighter across Northern Ireland, Northern England into Scotland, but quite a cool, blustery northwesterly breeze here with some showers filtering in. Temperatures here lower than recent days, 12 to 15, up to around 21 towards the southeast. See you soon.
Up next, I'm going to be speaking to people here at the Labour Party conference, despite the people who just walked in front of the camera, in Liverpool, looking ahead to Keir Starmer's dynamic speech. He's going to pledge to fix broken Britain. That's at 2 o'clock this afternoon. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, 11 a.m. on Tuesday the 10th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, live at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Bev Turner's in London.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to crush Hamas as he compared the terrorist group to the Islamic State. The bombing of Gaza continued overnight, and Hamas has warned that if Israel does not end its bombardment, it will execute one civilian live on television for every bomb that is dropped without warning.
And pro-Palestinian protesters, they've gathered in New York, Buenos Aires and London, where 3 people were arrested last night outside Israel's embassy. The Prime Minister says attempts to stir up community hatred will not be tolerated.
I say, not here. Not in Britain. Not in our country. Not in this century.
Say it as it is. That was the message from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, to the BBC as it refuses to call Hamas terrorists. Instead, they say they are fighters, militants or political resistance.
And of course, in other big news, Labour leader Keir Starmer will speak today in his keynote speech to the Labour conference. He's going to fix broken Britain, he says, if the party wins the general election. That speech is at 2 p.m. We'll bring you the latest.
Get in touch with me here in London, won't you? gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here is your very latest news with Aaron.
Good morning. It's a minute past 11. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. More than 187,000 people have been fleeing their homes in Gaza as Israel continues to launch deadly attacks on Hamas terrorists. Israel struck hundreds of targets overnight as the conflict enters a 4th day. Supplies of food, water and electricity to Gaza have been cut off. Its health ministry says at least 770 Palestinians have been killed and 4,000 injured since Saturday. The enclave is home to some 2.3 million people. Hamas has threatened to kill an Israeli hostage for every unannounced airstrike and to publish a recording of each execution. Hours ago, Israel retook control of the Gaza border fence stormed by Hamas gunmen at the weekend that left at least 900 of its citizens dead. Well, we can take you live now to the Gaza Strip. You can see the smoke filling the sky following fresh strikes this morning. A mosque, apartment blocks and hospitals are among the 200 or so sites that have been hit. Israeli forces are also gathering near the border ahead of an expected major ground offensive into the enclave. The United Nations is warning Israel its siege will exponentially deteriorate the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described Hamas fighters as savages akin to the ISIS terrorist group.
We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
Well, meanwhile, Iran says it was not involved at the attack at the weekend. In a televised speech, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei hailed what he called the irreparable military and intelligence defeat. He said the Israeli regime's own actions are to blame for the disaster. Iran does, of course, have links to the Hamas armed group. Now, the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, the United States and the UK have issued a joint statement. They offered their united support for Israel and condemned Hamas for what they described as appalling acts of terrorism. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is standing ready to support British-Israeli families.
Completely understand that there'll be many people who are very, very concerned about family, about loved ones who are in Israel. A very large proportion of the British nationals in Israel will be dual nationals who regard Israel as their permanent home, may even be serving with the Israeli Defense Forces. But anyone that is concerned should get in contact with the department. The contact details are available on our website, and we will, of course, provide support to any family who requests that of us.
Meanwhile, in London, 3 people were arrested during protests and vigils over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. One arrest was for assault on an emergency worker, another for racially motivated criminal damage, the third for possessing an offensive weapon. The Met Police is continuing its inquiries. They're also increasing patrols in the capital to reassure the public. The government says it is now safe for asylum seekers to return to the Bibi Stockholm barge, but they haven't yet given a date. It's been vacant since August following an outbreak of Legionella. But a Dorset resident is set to challenge the Home Office in court. Carolyn Parks, who lives on the Isle of Portland and is also the mayor, believes the government needs planning permission to use the barge in Portland Port. Human rights lawyer David Haig says the case could impact the government's future plans.
This is local residents. This isn't the European Court, this isn't the Supreme Court. This is local residents saying the government has circumvented normal planning rules which protect local areas, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Now, whether or not this will have much impact because the barge isn't currently being used, but it may have impact going forward if the government was looking at putting other barges in other areas.
The UK might have the slowest economic growth amongst a group of G7 countries next year, according to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF downgraded its prediction for the UK's economic growth for next year from 1 to 0.6%. It would make the UK's growth rate the weakest among the group of advanced economies. The IMF also predicts the UK prices could still go up by 7.7% this year. The government will spend nearly £200 million to attract more teachers into the profession. The money will be used to fund scholarships, bursaries and salary grants. Scholarships for those training to teach maths, physics, chemistry and computing will be brought up to £30,000 tax-free. It's after teaching unions warned of a deepening recruitment and retention crisis. We're on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. We're on your digital radio and on TV, of course, as well. That's it for me. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, we're just a couple of hours away now from Sir Keir Starmer's keynote speech at the Labour Party conference. Joining me here is a veteran of Labour Party conferences who's been at some far more conferences than me, and it certainly looks like he's been to far more conferences than me. Kevin Maguire.
I'm the one who always gets up.
From the Daily Mirror. And the Shadow Minister without portfolio, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Before we talk to Maguire, what is a Shadow Minister without portfolio?
Well, Andrew, I've had to go back to history and look at other people who've held this role, and I'm told that one of the previous Shadow Ministers without portfolio actually interpreted it to mean Shadow Minister of all portfolio.
Nice.
So I think you could safely say I can troubleshoot across a range of
You're
areas.
a roving trouble minister.
Yes.
Troubleshooter.
Troubleshooter, I hope, rather than a troublemaker.
Let's talk to you first of all, Maguire. Kevin Maguire and I, we've been sparring together for more years than we care to remember. This feels to me like we're back in the Tory conference. More business stands here, £2,500 to go and listen to Keir Starmer make a speech. Is it worth the money?
Yeah, look, it's like 1996, 1997, the years after when Labour was in power. Corporate Britain knows there is change. They've seen the polls, they know what people are thinking, and they've shifted. That's what it is. I mean, last week, the Tory conference, you were there in Manchester like me.
I was.
And it was a funeral. I mean, this is a wedding, isn't it? Everybody's jubilant. Even the heckler who was shouting at you earlier on, my supporter.
Yeah, you're one supporter, your only supporter.
One more than you.
The heckler was shouting at me, Tory boy. Well, I take that as a great comment because nobody's going to call you a boy.
Yeah, well, his hand movement suggested when he was shaking his coffee beans. I thought it was a bit more than that.
We're going to talk about your book shortly, but you are an historian as well as being an MP. An interesting analogy. People keep saying, is this conference 1991 when Neil Kinnock thought he was going to go to inevitable victory in 1992 and he blew it and John Major won an unlikely victory, or is it 1996? Tony Blair, young, telegenic, swept to a huge Labour landslide next year, or is this 1963 when an old Etonian chap called Alec Douglas-Hume became Tory leader without an election and was beaten the following year with quite a small majority by a modernising leader called Harold Wilson?
Yes, and I think there is a comparison with the early 1960s for this reason as well, Andrew, because the Conservative majority in 1959 was 100.
Yeah.
And it was overcome by Harold Wilson in one Parliament. And I think what's quite remarkable here is what Keir Starmer has done in one Parliament. People often used to ask me, would he be the Neil Kinnock who reformed the party but someone else won the election?
But actually, at the moment, it feels like he's a combination of Kinnock, Smith and Blair. What was achieved between 1983 and 1997, this is something we could achieve in one parliament if, and this is the big if, we do get people to vote for us next year in the general election, because nobody has cast a vote for us yet, and that's something we all remember.
Come on, you lot know it's in the bag. You're just parroting the line, if we're lucky enough, if we're privileged enough, it's in the bag. The Tories are divided. They didn't get a bounce from their conference last week.
Just because the Conservatives have lost the nation's trust doesn't mean we inherit it automatically. It means we have to work for it, it means we have to earn it. And when you've lost, as we have, 4 general elections in a row, we've experienced that defeat on a number of occasions and what that feels like. And that gives us a double the determination to absolutely make sure that we can win.
As a hack, Kevin, you and I wrote for the Spike yesterday for the Daily Mail because the big story is not here, frankly. It's the terrible events unfolding in the Middle East. Keir Starmer's people will have been working on that speech for months and months and months. They'll have had to rewrite it from top to bottom.
Yeah, I don't think the Middle East would have been in the original speech. You wouldn't have had Israel and Palestine. Why would you, in one way? It'd have probably focused on Ukraine and Russia, but it will be in there now. And getting the tone right is absolutely important. And then you think your speech is going to be overshadowed by those terrible events in Israel and Palestine. So do you take out any announcements if they were in? Do you save them for another day? Because there's no doubt on TV, radio, newspapers, online, the speech will not get the coverage it would have otherwise got, because a lot of the oxygen is sucked in by that conflict. So it's a tricky task for him, and it's a judgment call. But he's been pretty sure-footed so far on all these questions.
But it's hard, isn't it, Nick, Thomas Simmons, for a leader of the opposition to get into the narrative when it's a major international crisis unfolding, because people want to hear from the Foreign Secretary who can pull levers, the Prime Minister who can pull levers. The leader of the opposition can't do any of that.
Well, the leader of the opposition doesn't have office in government, quite obviously, but I think what we have seen so far at this conference is a very strong line from David Lammy and from Keir Starmer in condemnation, unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and the terrible attacks that there have been on Israel. We had a moment's silence yesterday that was led by Angela Rayner in conference of those lives that have been lost, and we've also been very strong on Israel's right to defend itself, which we support. Obviously it has to be done in a proportionate way that is in accordance with international law, but I think what you've seen, Andrew, is a real unity across the party on that position.
Should you use the word terrorist, and I'm glad you did, because Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Should the BBC stop this nonsense of calling them militants? They are terrorists.
Well, we supported prescription. We've supported that designation of them. How the BBC wishes to do it is obviously a matter.
What's your view? Should they change it to terrorist? Just change it to terrorist.
Well, look, that's an editorial decision for the BBC. Right. The last thing we want is politicians ordering the BBC what to do. But we are very clear on what Hamas is as an organisation.
Now, I want to talk to you about this man here, Clement Attlee. A lot of people might think, who? He won 2 elections.
He did.
But why is he the most significant leader, arguably, apart from Blair, apart from the fact he's one of only 3 who's won an election since the Second World War? Why is this man so important to you, and why have you written a book about him?
He is so important because his changes to the country in the post-war era still shape the country today. Creation of the welfare state, creation of the National Health Service, they are things that are still with us today. He is shaping our society all these decades later, but also on the international stage as well. Remember, he founded NATO with Ernest Bevin in 1949. NATO today, still foundational to our security, and has taken on an even greater relevance since Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. NATO is attracting new members in 2023, and I think someone who's that significant in our history deserves another.
Why did Winston Churchill, who shared a wartime coalition with him, famously say of Mr. Attlee is a very modest man, indeed he has a lot to be modest about, when in fact they rather liked each other?
They rather liked each other, and Attlee always showed great compassion and politeness towards Winston Churchill, was very keen when he won in 1945 that Churchill wouldn't have to leave Chequers too quickly.
If he let him stay on for a few more weeks.
He was quite happy for that to happen, and there was a mutual respect. And there's a nice moment in the mid-1950s when Attlee has been the Labour leader for about 20 years. Imagine that, party leader for 20 years. Churchill had been the Conservative leader for 15.
Yeah.
And there was a painting that had been done of Winston Churchill, and the two of them were reflecting on the fact that they had both been party leaders, and all the country had been through, both with winning the Second World War, but also building the peace under Clement Attlee, and the huge significance and stature of them both, I think, was really significant.
Kevin, if you had to choose a Labour leader who's the finest since the Second World War, you're a bit of an historian.
Oh, look,
is it Attlee?
Look, I think the finest Prime Minister since the Second World War was certainly Attlee. The other most significant was Thatcher, but I think she did a lot of damage and was a wrecker.
But she was significant.
He was a builder.
She was a changer.
But Attlee, as Nick's made out the case for him, but he's an extraordinary figure. He was a posh boy who, through his experiences in the East End of London, became a socialist.
There's a statue to him there.
He was a major in the army in the First World War. He was at Gallipoli.
Have you read this book?
No, I worship Attlee, and I will buy the book, and I will get you to sign it,
Kevin.
and I will read it and enjoy it, because there'll be a new take on him. But Attlee is a figure who deserves being revered in Britain.
And in 100 years' time, as the historian, Nick, will they still be talking about your book on Clement Attlee, or will they be talking about Tony Blair? Because he wasn't a great. He won 3 elections. He's an historic figure, but he wasn't a great. What did he change?
Well, no, I think Blair is underestimated, actually. I'd have Attlee at the top of the Labour pantheon, and just behind him I'd have Wilson and Blair behind it. And you think of the devolution legacy, you think what Blair achieved through Sure Start, the national minimum wage, which is Blair as well.
Independence of the Bank of England?
The independence of the Bank of England, which is something that is completely accepted by both major parties in 2024. So I think Blair does also have a great significance and deserves to be up the upper end of the pantheon.
And are you comfortable with how much influence he's got here now? The backseat driver. We had Peter Mandelson sticking his head over the platform here, and I said, "Are you the backseat drivers?" He's not the backseat driver now, Peter Mandelson. He was in the front row during the speech, during the shadow cabinet speech yesterday by Rachel Reeves. He's going to be in the front row again today. Blair has got the party back. Is that good?
I wouldn't describe them as backseat drivers, but
he's front seat.
I make no apology for learning the lessons from Labour politicians who've actually held power, because we're 13 years out of power. And I think going back to advice, whether it's Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Peter Mandelson, Jack Straw, many others from that era, that is a significant thing to do, because we can learn from them, just as I hope people can learn from Attlee with my book.
I would say it's a great pub quiz question, Kevin, when people say how many Labour leaders have won a general election since 1945, and people tend to say 6, 7, and they're dumbfounded when we say 3.
Yeah, but there's only been 6 Labour Prime Ministers in history.
Yeah.
And
that's 5 too many.
Yeah, well, the
5 too many. I'll give you Attlee.
Look, you've had 5 since 2010.
Well, yes, that's not the Tory party's finest now. I'm not to defend
No, I mean, you've had those great monuments to probity and success like Liz Truss, Theresa May, Boris Johnson and his parties, Rishi Sunak, who couldn't off a pint of milk.
Well, we don't know.
David Cameron, who was drummed out because he lost Europe. I mean, you've had a great time, haven't you?
Conference for you, how's it been? It feels to me, as a veteran observer of these, that this is a government in waiting.
The atmosphere here, I think, is very significant. I've been coming for 25 years plus to these. Were
you a child when you came? Were you in your short trousers?
Very young, Andrew. Very young. Very young.
They start them young in the legs.
And this does feel like a historic moment. That is what it feels like. The atmosphere is very buoyant, but there's also, I think, a real professionalism, a real discipline, a determination. That isn't just me coming on as a shadow cabinet member and saying no complacency. I think you can see that amongst the members as well.
One question, I give Kevin the final word. Jeremy Corbyn's been outside belly aching and refusing to condemn Hamas for what happened in the last few days. He's still a member of the Labour Party. Should he be a member of the Labour Party? Are you comfortable with him still being a member of the Labour Party?
That is obviously, our party membership has a specific process that has to be
You're going to sit on the fence, aren't you?
No, let me be clear. We completely reject that position that is being taken by the previous leader on this. We are unequivocal in our condemnation. And in a sense, doesn't it show the extent to which the Labour Party has changed, that we find the position that Keir Starmer and David Lammy are taking now widely accepted here across the party, and that alternative position, far from being a position in here, it's a position that's been taken in protest outside.
Kevin, what do you think?
Look, he should have condemned the Hamas violence, the slaughter of the innocents in Israel. Instead he said, I condemn all violence. Well, that's good, condemn all violence, I'd do the same. But when there has been a specific atrocity, condemn that atrocity. Then you can move on and condemn others. But Labour are going to try and stick with the government all the way on this issue, as they do on Ukraine and Russia. But the key bit is where you said Israel's response in Gaza needs to be proportionate. Yeah. You've got the most hard right government in the history of Israel. There are going to be lots of innocent civilians in Gaza too.
And I know we're under pressure and they're shouting at me, but on that, Netanyahu is guilty of the most egregious security breach on Israeli's borders in 50 years. That's going to probably help inform his military response, which is worrying.
Well, look, I'm sure he'll have a range of things in his mind at this time, but the important things for us is that they have the right to respond. There's no doubt about that. No doubt in self-defence, but as I emphasised earlier, proportionate in line with international law.
All right, that's Kevin Maguire from The Mirror, occasional political commentator. First time on GBNews for a long time. And this is Nick Thomas-Simmons' book. Here it is, 13-amp plug here. Clement Attlee, A Life in Politics by Nick Thomas-Simmons. And I did buy my copy, but apparently I do hear rumours it's already being reduced in price. I'm not sure if that's no, we don't peddle myths here on GB News. Still to come, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has announced he is going to run as an independent for the White House. That's all to come here on GB News.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 11:24. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, here in the studio in London, and Andrew Pearce at the Labour Party conference for us today in Liverpool. Now, let's go stateside for a moment. Huge announcement. Last night, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has now officially announced that he's running for the US presidency, but not as a Democrat and not, as was rumoured, as a Republican. The nephew of famous President John F. Kennedy had said that he'll be running as an independent. So what does that mean for his chances? Let's ask US political analyst Eric Ham. Good morning, Eric. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Just explain to our audience who might not be entirely familiar with Robert Kennedy Jr. and what he represents. Who is he and who is he talking to in the States?
Well, he is the son of the late Robert Kennedy Jr., and the nephew of the late former President John Kennedy. And he has been an ardent opponent of vaccinations, which is why he has been so revered by many on the right. But he still maintains a level of progressivism, particularly with Democrats, which is why when he first announced that he was running for president, it appeared that he had the support of at least 1 in 5 Democrats. But now so much of that has changed, and he hasn't been able to get much traction as of late as a Democrat, which is why he is dropping out of the race as a Democrat and going to re-enter the race as an independent. But now what we're seeing here is Republicans are now beginning to attack him, where at one time they were actually lauding him. In fact, he had been recently invited to speak at a conservative group in Nevada. But now what we're seeing here is they see that he could actually begin to siphon votes from Republicans based on his staunch message regarding vaccines.
So just to be really clear, and when you say that he is anti-vaccine, he had this label way before COVID came along. This was a life's work for him. And in fact, it wasn't just about vaccinations. It was about the pharmaceutical industry. So he had spent many years, what he saw is shining a light on corrupt pharmaceutical industries and the health of the nation. He's making a lot, isn't he, about how healthy he is. Didn't he, as the announcement yesterday, had himself like running up the steps of the building that we see in the Rocky movies, and he does a sort of physical, and is he about 65, I think, maybe older, but he's in great shape, and he's wanting to run on this health ticket. I won't just fix the nation with drugs, I'll fix you with fitness. And that's why it's appealing actually to a lot of people who see that the problems in America are about self-responsibility and looking after yourself.
Well, it's unclear how far he's actually going to go as an independent candidate. Because remember, as an independent candidate, you still have to register to actually get on the ballot in all 50 states. And in order to do that, you have to be registering at least 15%. And I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him. Remember, most independent candidates really do struggle. In fact, the last quasi-successful third-party candidate was Ross Perot, who actually garnered 19% of the vote, but that was more than 30 years ago. And right now what we're seeing here is many Democrats just don't see Robert Kennedy as a threat. In fact, they're welcoming the fact that now he's running as a third-party candidate. But of course, what we're now beginning to see is both the DeSantis and the Trump campaign begin to attack him. So I think that speaks to just how concerned they are about the threat that he is in terms of siphoning off votes from those Republicans for his independent candidacy.
What a fascinating time, Eric, though, in terms of how we define the left and the right. We have the same issue here in the UK, and that's precisely what's happening in America. It's very difficult now, isn't it, to decide when you've got Robert Kennedy appealing to the Trump base. Just reflect on that a little bit, because it is something to do with this idea of personal responsibility and the power of the individual.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, the Kennedys are known and they're seen as a paragon of Democratic politics, but we're also seeing just how much of a lightning rod that Robert Kennedy Jr. is. In fact, we know that at least 4 of his siblings came out in a statement saying that they do not support his candidacy and have even railed against him. But what we saw yesterday in that rollout was there were other of his siblings that are there. And so I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is now, I think, the epitome of what we're seeing in U.S. politics in terms of the polarization that is affecting our politics on both sides of the aisle. Because what you're seeing here is now, this is an individual who, while he is representative of this family that is seen as the one form of royalty in the United States, he is still seen as someone who's nuclear to both sides of the aisle. And the question becomes, how do you actually try to bring sides together to actually get things done? And I think he is emblematic of that, what we're seeing right now in the United States.
OK, thank you, Eric. Really interesting. Eric Ham there. For me, it certainly makes the run-up to the American election much more interesting. Now, still to come on the programme, we're going to be quizzing the Shadow Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Steve Reed. And a Labour council has said that it will cancel all Christmas lights because of a challenging financial situation. Do you believe them? That and much more after your morning's news with Aaron.
It's 11:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Nearly 200,000 people are fleeing their homes in Gaza as Israel continues to launch deadly attacks on Hamas terrorists. Israel struck hundreds of targets overnight. The conflict is into a 4th day. Supplies of water, food and electricity to Gaza have been cut off. Its health ministry says at least 770 Palestinians have been killed and 4,000 injured since Saturday. The enclave is home to 2.3 million people, and the UN is warning of a mounting humanitarian disaster. Hamas has threatened to kill an Israeli hostage for every unannounced airstrike and also to publish a recording of each execution. These pictures are coming to us live from Gaza, where it's just after 1:30 in the afternoon. Israel has been bombarding the enclave this morning, with some strikes hitting the nearby Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Israel says it has now retaken control of the Gaza border fence, which was stormed by Hamas gunmen, and 900 Israelis have been killed since Saturday. The government says it's now safe for asylum seekers to return to the Bibi Stockholm barge, but they haven't given a date yet. It's been vacant since August following an outbreak of Legionella disease, but a Dorset resident is set to challenge the Home Office in court over using the barge to house asylum seekers. Carolyn Parks, who is the mayor of the Isle of Portland, believes the government needs planning permission to use the barge in the port. And the UK might have the slowest economic growth amongst a group of G7 countries next year. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF downgraded its prediction for the UK's economic growth from 1 to 0.6% next year. It would make the UK's growth rate the weakest among a group of advanced economies. The IMF is also predicting prices in the UK could go up by 7.7% this year. More on all of our stories, as always, on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick look at the markets today. The pound buys you $1.2271, €1.1575. Gold will cost £1,514.15 per ounce. The FTSE 100 is at 7,602 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Still to come, is Christmas cancelled in Medway in Kent as the Labour Council removed this year's annual festive lights. Why? We will tell you after the break. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
.37, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearson. I'm in Liverpool for the Labour conference, Bev's in London. I've got right here with me now, did I say, Dan Norris, who is the Labour West of England Metro Mayor. Just briefly, Dan, tell us what a Metro Mayor is as opposed to a City Mayor.
Well, you're a regional mayor with strategic powers, so it's for things
you're like Andy Burnham.
It's like Andy Burnham, but in my case, I'm in Bristol and the West Country.
Right. Now, Keir Starmer says, Labour say, if they win power, there'll be more Metro Mayors. Why do we need more layers of politicians and bureaucracy?
Well, it's not more layers because the powers I have been taken away from local councils, for example, so it's a different way of doing the same thing.
But there's more bureaucracy. How many bureaucrats? How many people do you employ?
Well, I've got 400 civil servants.
400?
But they're not in London now. They're with me doing the job where the decisions need to be made, so they've got a better understanding. So it is a good thing.
Do you need 400?
I'm afraid I do, yeah. It's unbelievably complicated. I mean, I have responsibilities for things like transport, which is immensely complicated, huge levels of legislation that apply to it. You have to get it right.
Right.
So those people, rather than being in London or the South East, are now down with me, and they understand the region.
And the point is, you are in touch because you're local, as opposed to civil servants driving transport issues in Whitehall.
I'm a genuine believer that you make better decisions, not always, but usually if you make the decisions close to where they're going to be impacting.
Right.
And if your civil servants are in the area, if they're going to see the public that are going to be affected and even be obviously members of the public themselves, they're more likely to make good decisions, I think.
Now, Rachel Reeves in her speech yesterday, one of the big ways she says she's going to get Britain building again, she's going to reform planning rules and regulations. If I had £1, Dan Norris, for every time I've heard a politician say that, Liz Truss said it, Boris Johnson said it, Michael Gove said it, it never happens. The planning laws stay arcane, bureaucratic, always favouring the house builders. I mean, so how is it going to change?
Well, I think it's about your determination. Now, you like me, have been around political scene for a long time, and yes, there has been lots of pledges that haven't been met. But I think the circumstances are different now. I think the pandemic has made a difference to people's attitudes. I think people are capable of accepting new things because a lot of planning issues are about NIMBYism. Resistance to things. So, you know, I remember when I was an MP all those years ago, there'd be a new housing area built. Those people were very pleased to have new houses. Then when there was an extension of that area with new houses beyond that, they were the biggest objectives.
Of course.
So there's always these tensions.
How do you get round that? By changing the planning regulations. How do you change that?
Because I think you have to have two things. Engagement with the public and the recognition that when you decide, it's difficult. There's not easy choices. And what everybody tries to do in politics is pretend everything is hunky-dory and fine, and it isn't. And I think there's a realism in Labour's message now that is kind of saying, yeah, you've got to make some tough choices. If you don't want to carry on with too few homes for people who desperately need them, you've got to make some tough choices.
So explain in layman's terms how what Labour will do will unlock land to build houses on, and why people who can't get on the housing ladder are thinking, well, do you know, I really like the sound of that.
Well, for example, lots of people understandably have an objection to when the green belt is built.
Yeah.
And I get that completely. But when you look at the green belt, a Labour policy back in 1948, and you look at what the green belt actually consists of now, I've got an area just north of Bristol, which is a big motorway interchange. It's green belt.
Right.
Yeah, I have beautiful, irreplaceable countryside that doesn't have protection. I'd like to do something so that we don't lose any green belt area at all, but we protect what is really precious and still there, and we develop where it's already been undermined.
You all know this because it's your world. There's probably now more green belt than there was 10 years ago. Actually, more land designated as green belt.
Probably.
Again, somebody who wants to get on the housing ladder, is this going to lead to more council houses being built because of the reform in planning rules, or is it going to be more private housing?
There'll need to be more council houses for sure, but it'll probably need to be both, because I think the demand is huge for housing, absolutely huge. What I want to see, though, is good quality council homes. Because what I think is, I grew up in a council house myself.
Like me.
They all look the same.
Yeah.
I expect your experience was similar. They didn't seem to be individual. They didn't recognise the kind of aspirations that people have these days in particular back then. And I don't think people want that replicated. What they want is something that recognises individuals' uniqueness. They don't want them in large areas where lots of people live in the same area. They want them in little spaces all across our areas, so that people can feel part of the community, not somehow labelled.
How do you also persuade house builders who've got prime pieces of land to stop sitting on the land for years and years and years, which they do because they're waiting for the value of the land to increase? How do you stop that? Because it's a huge roadblock.
That is difficult. I mean, that's land banking, as it's known. And you'll understand the difficulty of that. But look, that's capitalism. That is because they know that if they purchase that, that will have an increased value to them in the future, and they sit on that. I think you have to legislate to change that. But one thing you certainly need to do is, and I think the Tories have fallen foul of this, they've got a lot of money from developers and housing companies paying for Tory party finances, and that has affected that thinking. So I think we've been stuck a bit because we had this business where we had the amber light thing, didn't we? The green, amber, red thing, which was a crazy, crazy policy. And everybody, including Conservative supporters, were up in arms about that. What we need is something that recognises that, first of all, there's a need, that we need to solve that problem, that it's not done cheaply or easily, and that difficult choices will have to be made.
Just fine, we've only got time for one more question. Are you confident that the changes in the planning rules will mean that Labour will be able to build how many houses every year, and how quickly will it be under a Labour government?
Well, look, I'm not totally confident, because what I know is there's a skills shortage, and I have responsibility as a regional mayor for skills and training for post 16. We do not have enough builders, we don't have enough bricklayers, carpenters, and all the rest of it. So we do need to build that capacity up. But if we have that capacity, I'm confident we can build them, yes.
All All right, he's full title. He's the Labour West of England Metro Mayor. There's going to be more of them if Labour win the election. Dan Norris, former Labour MP. Great to talk to you. Bev, back to you in the studio in London.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm joined back in the studio by Tonya Buxton and Nigel Nelson. Guys, I just want to reflect for a minute. We're on day 4 of the conflict in the Middle East. Tonya, we woke up Saturday morning, saw these incredible images, the latest death toll looking like 1,500 people in 3 days on both sides. Your thoughts?
It's completely and utterly heartbreaking. That's what my thoughts are, the horror of it. And when you saw how it happened, you looked at these kids being shot at a music festival. Yeah. You saw that girl being kidnapped on the bike, and my heart just clutched. I just couldn't breathe from the terror and the horror of it. And now you know that Israel is going to retaliate in a manner that's just going to obliterate the Gaza Strip. Yeah. So lots more children, lots more people, innocents dying. I just no words for this horror. It's just a horror. No one is going to benefit from this. What were Hamas thinking? They knew that Israel would retaliate in this way. They knew that.
And they knew that Palestinian civilians would be killed, Nigel. It's a horrible situation. What are your sort of reflections upon it now? And it's a bit soon to ask you, but where do you think this goes next?
Well, and the danger is that you drag other countries in, like Iran, and Iran especially, which is always Israel's big fear. I've been disappointed that there have been those on the left who have not unequivocally condemned Hamas for what they're doing. That doesn't mean you have to cease believing in a Palestinian state, but what Hamas did is inexcusable, dreadful, horrible, and they should be called out for that. And there have been people who haven't done that.
Like the BBC, not calling them terrorists.
And the BBC still defending them as political activists.
Yeah, you're not calling them terrorists, which is what they are. They are causing complete and utter terror.
Yeah. Right, let's move on to issues closer to home. I've been trailing this morning. This is Medway Council in Kent, who are saying, Nigel, that they're going to cancel Christmas lights due to the challenging financial situation. Why are they doing this?
Because of the challenging financial situation.
It's a Labour council.
Yeah, it's a Labour council, but it's only just become a Labour council. It was previously a Tory council. They've had a £70 million overspend, and what they're trying to do desperately is save money and do it without cutting services. So that's why they're doing it. Historically, you've had a situation where the government between 2010 and 2020 cut central funding to local authorities by 17.5%. This is the kind of thing that happens when they do that. Yes, there's been mismanagement at some local authorities. They've had things that have come out of the blue they weren't expecting. My own local authority in Kent has to deal with a lot of migrant children that come across the channel, and they're desperately in need of more funds for that. But things like this, you've got to cut somewhere. And would you rather an old lady didn't get a healthcare visitor, or you lose your Christmas lights?
But it's an extraordinary metaphor, Tonya.
It's virtue signalling it.
The children who are coming here as children of immigrants, illegal immigrants.
Is it just children, Nigel?
Well, no, it's not just children.
You have to say children to kind of pluck at the heartstrings. Is that what you're doing there?
No, what I'm saying is that Kent County councillors had to deal with unaccompanied children, and they're in the front line because they're coming across from Calais to Dover. They're in the front line, and they have to find a way of putting these kids up somewhere.
But there are...
Cutting 75,000 for the Christmas lights. I think, councillors' expense accounts haven't been cut. It's 75,000. Why haven't they gone to tender to firstly get it done cheaper? Why haven't they gone to local businesses to say, look, this is what's going to happen?
Sponsor it.
A lot of businesses would help do it, rather than just say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to cut the lights. It's just, again, it's like flag waving.
But isn't it a brilliant message to the people of Kent? We are dark this Christmas because the Conservative government have left us no money to turn the Christmas lights on. It's maybe I'm being
yes, absolutely right.
Maybe I'm too cynical, but I just can't help but feel that if it was a Labour government, the Labour Council would keep those lights on at all costs.
Yes.
Well, I know Vince Maple, the leader of the council. I don't believe he would do that. I think it's perfectly sensible. You cut things that you really don't need rather than cut things that you do need.
In a £17 million deficit, overspend 75,000, which I reckon they could bring down to less than half than that. Please, it's ridiculous.
It's also, do you know what? It ties into what we were talking about earlier about the carbon credits on our food. It's about a joyless existence.
Yeah.
It's just about a life in which we don't have pleasure and we don't have fun with things. It's just all about living in the dark, quite literally. Right, Tonya and Nigel, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to go back to Andrew in Liverpool now, who I believe has a shadow minister with him. Andrew.
I do indeed, Bev. Thank you. I'm joined now by the Shadow Secretary of State for the Environment, Steve Reed. I was just saying, Steve, before he came on air, what should we talk about? And he said, why don't we talk about Blair's speech? Oh, Freudian slip, Shadow Minister.
Well, easy to confuse.
Tony Blair's speech?
Easy to confuse one great leader with another, isn't it?
Has Tony Blair written it? Because his people are everywhere. You and I were at the Tony Blair Institute.
I mean, as you've seen, this is very much Keir Starmer's party now.
Yeah.
Like, what he's done in like 3.5 years to get this party united behind him and facing outwards to the British people, given the state of our party in 2019 when we suffered our worst election defeat for 85 years. It's nothing more than transformative.
Just imagine if Jeremy Corbyn was still leader of the Labour Party, this appalling Hamas terrorist attack, brutal, medieval, and he has failed so far to condemn Hamas for it. He's condemned violence on both sides. Where would you be? I mean, it's extraordinary that you ever had a man like that leading your party.
I mean, I won't even let my mind go to that place. I think what's happened here is this Labour Party, under Keir Starmer, has quite rightly expressed in the hall yesterday, where we had that minute's silence for the victims of the atrocious terrorist attack on innocent Israeli civilians. Our hearts all go out to them, to their families, and everybody that is suffering in Israel after. It's an atrocity, the like of which most of us have never seen before.
It's going to have a profound impact, isn't it, on all of us, because there potentially are British hostages. We don't know how many British people have been killed. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says he's not going to get into numbers, and you can see why, because he doesn't want to give Hamas any ammunition. There's going to be ramifications for the economy with oil prices rising.
Well, we will have to wait and see, won't we? This is a horrific situation that is still unfolding. I think people are right not to speculate about exactly what's going on. I think we need to express our sympathy and condolences to the Israeli people, but also our support to the Israeli government in taking the action they need to take to get security back for their people.
What do you expect? Well, you probably know what's in the speech because you're in the Shadow Cabinet and you've had a Shadow Cabinet meeting and you've probably seen an early draft.
We don't see all of it, actually.
OK, but he, of course, has had to rewrite this speech because of the military conflict. His Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, made a pretty good speech yesterday, widely praised. I think she'd improved her delivery, her whole manner. She was nervous at the beginning, but I think it was probably her best speech. Keir Starmer is not a natural orator, is he? Does that matter?
Well, we'll see in a few moments how he's going to go down in the hall. I mean, Keir always goes down well in the hall. I've been here for all of his
beyond
speeches.
The hall, isn't it? This is about speaking to beyond the hall.
I saw Rachel yesterday, how well that went down in the hall. But of course, this is the party conference of a party that hopes to win the trust of the British people to form the next government. So we are speaking directly to the British people, and it is the concerns of the British people that we're addressing, as Rachel did yesterday in her speech with the announcements that she was making about securing the economy and rebuilding Britain. You'll hear Keir today building on what Rachel said and further fleshing out Labour's offer to meet the challenges that are facing the British people in the world that we currently live in.
Does it feel to you like you are a government in waiting? Does it feel like that to you?
We're a potential.
Feels like it to me, being a veteran who coming to these conferences.
I mean, there's something just pre-97 about this conference. And were you involved in? Yeah, you were there. I wasn't there. But at that point, there were still concerns about whether Labour could win in '97. We share that feeling. Nothing is being taken for granted. Whenever anyone stands up and says the next Prime Minister, the next Chancellor, we all say no, make no assumptions. We have to earn back the trust of the British people. We know that is not job done yet. The announcements coming out today will be the start of fleshing out Labour's agenda, but that will continue over the coming months until we get to that general
And just finally, if you look at the polls, yes, Labour's ahead, and yes, people want to change, but they don't always say they want change to Labour because they're not always sure what's on the box. They're not sure what Sir Keir Starmer stands for. They're not sure who Keir Starmer is. Does he have to show us more of who he is, what he is?
I think all of that's true, Andrew, actually, and I think people do want to know who is the man, Keir Starmer. But I think the reason that you get some of those comments is it's been such a short period of time, 3.5 years since that huge defeat for Labour in 2019 when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, to this completely transformed party that we have all around us here today. And it's been such a short period of time, people are still getting used to the fact that it's a new party.
All right. That's Steve Reid. He's the Shadow Environment Secretary. I suspect if I'm talking to him this time next year at the Labour Conference, he'll be the Environment Secretary. We've come to the end of the show. The live desk is up next. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, good morning. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got heavy rain across Scotland through today, bringing some disruption. There'll be some spells of hazy sunshine elsewhere, but it is quite a grey start this morning, some low cloud mist and fog, slowly burning back as we go through the morning, but taking its time. We can see the heavy rain across northwest Scotland, this slowly pushing its way southeastwards. A Met Office rain warning in force here, 20 to 50 millimetres of rain possible, leading to some local flooding in places. Cloudier further southwards across northern parts of England, but the best of the hazy sunshine once again. Central and southern parts of England and Wales, 23, possibly 24 degrees. That heavy rain continues to slowly push its way southeastwards through Tuesday evening. The Met Office warning eases during the evening time as that rain clears, showers following, and then rain turning heavy as it moves into Wales, into the Midlands during the early hours. Southeastern areas staying generally dry. Temperatures turning fresher across the north, single figures here, holding up 14 to 16 Celsius further south. So with this cloudy wet zone across central parts of the UK Wednesday morning, this generally slowly moving southeastwards as we head through the day. Quite a muggy feel to things here. Brighter across Northern Ireland, Northern England into Scotland, but quite a cool, blustery northwesterly breeze here with some showers filtering in. Temperatures here lower than recent days, 12 to 15, up to around 21 towards the southeast. See you soon.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to